The pen felt heavier than it should have. Josephine Adler had signed her name thousands of times before. On contracts, on architectural drawings, on birthday cards, and grocery receipts, and checks for the hydro bill. But the moment the tip of the ballpoint touched the line at the bottom of the divorce agreement, her hand stopped moving. Just for a second. Just long enough for her to feel the full weight of what 34 years of being alive and 7 years of being a wife had brought her to: a folding table in a lawyer's office on Wellington Street, the radiator clicking in the corner, the smell of coffee going cold. She signed. The lawyer, a quiet man named Harold Webb, slid the second copy across. She signed that one too. She didn't cry until she was in the elevator. Not because she was trying to hold it together. She simply didn't have the energy to make any sound. The tears just came down her face the way rain does on a windshield. Quietly. Without drama. Outside, Ottawa was doing what Ottawa does in November. Gray sky, bare trees, the wind cutting down Elgin Street like it had somewhere to be. Josephine stood on the sidewalk for a moment, with her coat half-buttoned and her bag strap digging into her shoulder, and she told herself that the cold was why her eyes were watering. She took the bus home, not because she couldn't drive. Her car was in the underground lot 3 blocks away, but because she didn't trust herself behind the wheel. She sat in the second-to-last row, pressed against the window, and watched the city go by. She thought about the first time she and Brandon had driven through this part of downtown together. He'd been showing off, pointing out buildings he wanted to buy someday. She'd been 27, new to his world, and still believing that wanting things loudly was the same as deserving them. She'd loved that about him then, his certainty. The way he walked into rooms like the room had been waiting for him. She understood now that the room hadn't been waiting for him. He'd just been loud. Brandon Merritt was the kind of man who looked excellent on paper. Fourth-generation money, a seat on the board of a commercial real estate firm his grandfather had built. A jaw that photographed well, and the particular confidence that comes from never having had to seriously reconsider a single major decision. He wore it all so naturally that for years Josephine had taken it for substance. She was an architect, had been since before they met. She'd done her degree at Carleton, spent 2 years at a firm in Vancouver, come back to Ottawa to work for herself. She had a small practice, just her and 2 junior associates and a project manager named Bev, who ran the whole thing with a combination of spreadsheets and stubbornness. It wasn't glamorous, but the work was hers. She and Brandon had met at a fundraiser for the National Arts Center. He'd asked what she did and actually listened to the answer, which was rarer than it should have been. They dated for a year, got married in a ceremony at a restored heritage building in the Glebe. Josephine had insisted on that, and Brandon had pretended it was his idea too. For a while, they were happy. Or at least she was. She thought he was. She had stopped being sure about a lot of things since. The first sign was not dramatic. It never is. It was the way he started taking phone calls in the garage, the way he'd come to bed late and face the wall, the particular blankness in his eyes when she talked about work, about the community housing project she'd been designing for a neighborhood group in Vanier. He'd stopped asking questions. She'd told herself he was stressed, that the firm was going through something, that people went through seasons. She found out about Tara Kessling on a Tuesday morning in March. Not through a text message she wasn't supposed to see, or a lipstick mark, or any of the things you imagine when you imagine finding out. She found out because a colleague of Brandon's, a man named Douglas, who had apparently developed a conscience at an inconvenient time, sent her an email, just a few lines. He apologized for what he was about to tell her. Then he told her. Josephine had read the email twice, closed her laptop, and gone and stood in the shower for 20 minutes, with the water running cold because she'd forgotten to adjust the temperature. Tara Kessling was 26. She was a marketing director for a lifestyle brand. She had one of those Instagram accounts with 140,000 followers, and a consistent aesthetic involving oat lattes and beige interiors. She was the kind of person who described herself as passionate about storytelling. Brandon had been seeing her for 14 months. The divorce took 4 months and cost Josephine a significant amount of money she didn't entirely have. Paid to a family lawyer who was very good at her job and extremely matter-of-fact about things like asset division and the legal definition of marital property. Josephine's firm was considered her own, That was clean, at least. But the house in Westboro they'd bought together, the investments, the weekend property in Prince Edward County, those took time. Brandon didn't fight ugly, exactly. But he didn't fight fair either. He had better lawyers and more patience, and the particular advantage of a man who had never truly needed anything from another person. He offered her a settlement that was technically legal and morally thin, and when she pushed back, he made noises about how drawn-out proceedings would be difficult for both of them, and she understood that what he meant was that he was willing to let this become expensive for her in ways it would not be for him. She signed in the end because Bev sat across from her at the office kitchen table one evening and said, quietly, "Joe, you are not well. You need to stop fighting a war of attrition with a man who is not tired." She signed. She also, 2 weeks before she signed, learned that she was pregnant. She had not told Brandon. She had not told anyone except her doctor, and eventually Bev. The timing was, to use the word her doctor gently offered, complicated. She was 6 weeks along when she sat across from Harold Webb and pressed the pen to the paper. She was 8 weeks along when Brandon called her, 3 days after the ink was dry, to tell her he was going to be taking a step back from public life for the near future, because he and Tara were expecting to be engaged before summer. She sat in her car in the parking garage after that call and stared at the concrete wall and thought, with a clarity that surprised her, "I'm going to have to build something new. From nothing, the way I know how to do." She told Brandon about the pregnancy through her lawyer. His response came through his lawyer 3 days later. It was a letter outlining his position, which could be summarized as, he was disputing his obligations given the circumstances of the separation. He was prepared to acknowledge paternity pending a test, and he was expressing concern, through 3 pages of legal language, about the wisdom of her decision to proceed with the pregnancy as a single woman given her financial circumstances. He did not call her. He did not ask how she was. Her lawyer, a sharp-edged woman named Patricia who had seen this particular shape of thing before, said simply, "He's positioning. Don't respond emotionally. Let me handle this." Josephine nodded. Then she went home, sat on her kitchen floor with her back against the cabinets, and let herself cry properly for the first time since the elevator. The next morning she got up, went to the office, and finalized the drawings for the Vanier housing project. She was 16 weeks pregnant when she met Owen. Not in a significant way. Not in a way that felt like anything except mildly embarrassing at the time. She had been trying to carry a box of files from her car to her building's lobby. The elevator in her parking garage was out, and she was navigating the stairs, and she misjudged the distance between the second and third step and stumbled. The box went first, the files scattered. She managed not to fall, catching herself on the railing with one hand and pressing the other instinctively against her stomach. "Hey, here." A man was beside her collecting papers from the step below. He had a messenger bag over one shoulder and a coffee in the other hand, and he'd just set the coffee down on the flat part of the railing, without being asked the way people do when they act before they think. "I'm fine," she said, which was not entirely accurate. "Okay." He didn't argue it. He just kept picking up files. His name was Owen Calloway. She found this out because he introduced himself when he handed her the last of the papers in the same straightforward way you'd introduce yourself to a neighbor. He lived on the 4th floor. She was on the 7th. He was a civil engineer with the federal government, had moved into the building 6 months ago from Halifax, and knew no one in the building except the superintendent and a retired teacher named Margaret on the 3rd floor, who sometimes left banana bread in the mail area. She thanked him. He told her the banana bread was very good. She should watch for it. She did not think about him again for 2 weeks. The second time she saw him, he was in the lobby checking his mail, and she was coming in from a site visit, still in her work coat with her drawings rolled under her arm, and he held the inner door open. She thanked him again, he said. The banana bread showed up this morning. Mailboxes 6 through 12. She checked her mailbox. There was a small loaf wrapped in paper with a piece of tape holding a note. For the neighbors. No nuts. She ate half of it standing at her kitchen counter before she had her coat off. The third time she saw Owen, she was sitting in the lobby of the building on a Thursday evening, waiting for a cab she'd called because her car was at the mechanic and the cab app wasn't loading properly, and she was visibly exhausted and probably looked it. He came in from outside with grocery bags in both hands and stopped when he saw her. "You all right?" "Waiting for a cab." He set down one of the bags. "Where are you going?" "Queensway, Carlton. Appointment." He looked at the time on his phone. "I'm heading that way. I have the car tonight." A pause. "If that's easier." She almost said no out of reflex. Instead, she thought of Bev saying, "You need to stop being too proud to accept a hand." "If it's genuinely on your way," she said. It wasn't entirely on his way. They both understood this without saying so. The appointment was a routine prenatal. Everything was going well. The twins were healthy. She had found out at 17 weeks. Twin girls. She had sat in the ultrasound room afterward and stared at the image for a very long time, and the technician had given her a moment, and she had thought, 2, and then, okay, 2. She told Owen in the car on the way back, not because she'd planned to, but because the silence had become the kind that wanted filling. And he'd asked how it went, and she'd said simply, "Good, good news. I'm having twins," he said. "Congratulations." Not in the complicated way people had been saying it. The way that came with a look, a hesitation, a silent acknowledgement of her situation that always made her feel the need to reassure them. Just congratulations. Like it was the only reasonable thing to say. "Thank you," she said, and looked out the window at the lights along Merivale Road, and felt very briefly like she could breathe. They became, in a gradual and unplanned way, something close to friends. He knocked on her door one Saturday to ask if she had a Phillips screwdriver he could borrow. She lent it, and he returned it with a bag of mandarins, because he'd bought too many. She ran into him at the grocery store, and they walked the produce section together for 20 minutes, talking about nothing in particular. He texted her once. They had exchanged numbers the night she dropped something in the parking garage and needed him to watch her car while she ran up, to say that the elevator was working again. She texted back a small celebration emoji, and he sent back a thumbs up, and that was that. He was easy to be around. He didn't ask too many questions. He didn't treat her like a problem to be managed or a situation to be navigated. He just talked to her like a person. She did not think of him as anything more than that. She was 20 weeks pregnant, and in the middle of negotiating custody terms with a man who was now publicly engaged and seemed to be enjoying the attention it generated. And she had 2 junior associates and a project manager depending on her to keep a small architecture practice running. She didn't have the capacity to think of anyone as anything more than what they were in that moment. The custody negotiation took longer than it should have. Brandon's position, delivered through his lawyer, in installments that seemed designed to wear her down, was that he was willing to acknowledge his parental obligations, but expected a joint custody arrangement that reflected his schedule, which included significant travel commitments and the particular complications of his upcoming marriage. Patricia argued that a man who had not been present for a single prenatal appointment and had made no practical contribution to the pregnancy had limited grounds on which to dictate terms. The back and forth went on for months. He had also, in the first weeks, made quiet overtures about her signing an NDA as part of the final agreement, something that would restrict her ability to discuss the circumstances of their separation publicly. Patricia had told her she didn't have to sign it. She hadn't. Brandon's lawyer had expressed concern. Patricia had expressed something less polite. In the meantime, Josephine was running a practice, managing subcontractors on 3 active projects, attending prenatal appointments alone, and sleeping badly. Bev arrived at the office one morning to find her asleep on the small sofa in the meeting room. At 6:30 in the morning, her reading glasses still on, a set of revised floor plans open on the table. Bev made coffee. Then she sat down across from her and waited for her to wake up. "Don't," Josephine said before Bev could speak. "I wasn't going to say anything. You have a face. I always have a face." Bev pushed the coffee toward her. "The Vanier project is on track." Mira finished the specification sheets. "You have 2 calls this afternoon and a site visit at 3. "I know. I moved the 3 o'clock to 4 so you can nap." Josephine put her face in her hands. "I don't need to nap. The circles under your eyes suggest otherwise." She napped. The girls were born in late October, during what turned out to be an ice storm that shut down the Queensway for 4 hours and made Josephine's cab to the hospital 20 minutes late. Bev came with her. She had asked Bev 6 weeks earlier, tentatively, if she would be willing, and Bev had said, obviously in the tone of someone who had considered it already decided. Hazel arrived first, then Pearl, 12 minutes later, with considerably more fuss about the whole thing. They were healthy. They were small. Not alarmingly, but enough to be kept for observation for the first day. Josephine held them both, one after the other, in the yellow light of the delivery room, while Bev stood at the window looking out at the ice, and the nurses moved quietly around them. She sent a formal notification through Patricia to Brandon's lawyer. He did not come to the hospital. He sent flowers 2 days later, delivered to the hospital reception, with a card that had been clearly written by someone else. Owen texted, "Congratulations again. If you need anything in the next few weeks, groceries, anything, let me know." She had not told him she was going to the hospital. Bev must have mentioned it. She texted back a thank you. He texted back a photo of the banana bread he'd been saving in his freezer, presumably for a significant occasion. She laughed out loud. It startled her, the laugh, because it was the first time in a long time that something had surprised her in a good direction. She took 12 weeks of leave from the practice. Not complete leave. She checked in with Bev, answered the important emails, reviewed drawings during nap times. But she was home and present, and learning what it meant to have two small people whose needs were not abstract. It was harder than she had expected. It was also, in ways she hadn't anticipated, quieter in her heart. Like the storm had passed, and she was standing in what was left, and it wasn't nothing. It was actually quite a lot. Owen helped, not in any grand or romantic way. He picked up groceries when she mentioned she couldn't get out. He put together the piece of IKEA furniture she'd ordered and given up on at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday, because the instructions made no sense, and she was running on 4 hours of sleep. He sat on her couch one Sunday afternoon in November and held Pearl while she slept, not speaking, just there, while Josephine drafted a proposal on her laptop across the room. "You're good with her," she said at one point. He glanced down at the sleeping baby. "She's doing most of the work." She smiled at her laptop. She told herself this was neighborliness. It mostly was. Brandon and Tara married in July. It was covered in an Ottawa Society column, and to Josephine's complete lack of surprise, a lifestyle magazine that Tara had a relationship with. There were photos. The venue was a restored estate in Gatineau. Tara's dress was described at length. Josephine found out about the article because a friend sent her the link with a row of grimace emojis. She looked at it for 30 seconds and then closed it and went back to the preliminary drawings for a school renovation project in Canada. The custody arrangement had been finalized in April. Brandon would have the girls on alternating weekends and for 2 weeks in summer, subject to scheduling. He had agreed to child support. Eventually, after Patricia had made clear that the alternative was a formal court process, Brandon did not want to be on record for. He had not, in the months since, rearranged a single weekend for them. He had not held Hazel. He had not held Pearl. He had seen them twice, in a supervised arrangement at a neutral location that Patricia had insisted on, and both times had treated the visits with the polite, slightly detached manner of a man fulfilling an obligation. Josephine didn't talk about it often. When she did, it was with Bev, or occasionally with her mother, who lived in Sudbury and called every Sunday, and had been saying what she thought of Brandon Merritt since approximately the 2nd year of their marriage. She was getting used to carrying it quietly. She was getting used to a lot of things. The gala was in September. She almost didn't go. It was the annual fundraiser for a heritage preservation society, and she had designed the restoration of a building they were celebrating that evening. A former textile warehouse in the Byward Market that had been converted into community art space. She was nominally being recognized, which meant she was expected to attend, which meant she needed to find something to wear and someone to watch the girls and the energy to stand in a room full of people for 3 hours and receive congratulations with what she hoped was grace. She had asked Owen if he would watch them. He had said yes without hesitation. She had pointed out that 2 11-month-old girls was not a small commitment for a Saturday evening. He had said he was aware of that, and had already confirmed with Margaret on the 3rd floor, who had requested the opportunity to participate and had sent back a list of snack preferences, which she had looked up, apparently, online. Josephine stood in her bathroom getting ready and thought about the fact that she had, in the 9 months since her daughters were born, assembled a small and unlikely village. Bev, Owen, Margaret. Her mother, who drove down for a week every 2 months and took over the kitchen with the focused intensity of someone on a mission. Her junior associate Mira, who had started doing the school pickup for Josephine on Tuesdays without being asked, in exchange for what she called real project experience, which was also just Josephine giving her real project experience. She had not expected any of it. She was not someone who found it easy to receive help. She was working on it. She put on the dark green dress she'd bought 2 years ago and never worn, and she went. Brandon was there. She found out approximately 40 seconds after she arrived, when she came around a pillar at the edge of the main hall and nearly walked directly into him. He looked the same, slightly tanned. The suit was new. Tara was beside him in a silver gown, her hand resting in the crook of his arm with the particular proprietary ease of someone recently married. She was very beautiful in the way of people who work at it consistently. Brandon's face went through several things in quick succession. Then he settled on a particular expression, pleasant, controlled, the face he used in board meetings, and said, "Joe, I didn't know you'd be here. It's my project," she said. "Right, yes, of course." Tara extended her hand. "I've heard so much." Her smile was the kind that meant nothing specific. Josephine shook her hand. She thought of the letter from Brandon's lawyer about the pregnancy. She thought of the 2 hospital visits he hadn't made. She thought of Hazel's first morning smile, which had happened 2 weeks ago, directed at Owen's face, and which had made her own heart do something involuntary. "Congratulations on your marriage," she said. She meant it neither warmly nor coldly. She meant it from a great distance. She excused herself and went to find the organizers. She was standing at the edge of the room later in the evening, her second glass of sparkling water in hand, when Tara appeared beside her, without Brandon. "I wanted to say," Tara began, and her voice was lower now, less performed. "I know this must be strange for you." "Not particularly," Josephine said. "I want you to know I care about Brandon's girls when we're in a place to spend time with them." "You've met them once," Josephine said. Her voice didn't rise. "In a parking lot, for 40 minutes. Hazel cried the whole time. Tara's mouth opened slightly. "I'm not saying this to be unkind," Josephine continued. "I'm saying it because I want you to understand what spending time with them actually looks like. It's not a photo. It's not a Saturday." She looked at her sparkling water. "It's showing up on the hard Saturdays, that's all." Tara said nothing. "The building tonight," Josephine said, more quietly, "took 4 years. I started the design before I knew I was pregnant, finished the specifications while I was negotiating my divorce, presented the final drawings at 34 weeks. Every hard day I showed up." She set her glass on a passing tray. "That's all I know how to do, show up." She walked away. She did not feel triumphant exactly. She felt like herself. That was enough. She told Owen about it when she got home, standing in the kitchen while he made tea, and gave her the rundown on the evening. Hazel had gone down without complaint. Pearl had staged a brief protest around 9:30. Resolved by Margaret reading her a picture book twice in a row, and then once more for good measure. Both were sleeping. She told him about the conversation with Tara, about standing in her green dress in the building she'd designed and saying out loud, for the first time, what she believed. Owen listened. He did not offer commentary. He poured 2 cups of tea and put one in front of her and said, "How do you feel?" "Like I said something true," she said. "It doesn't fix anything, but it's true." He nodded. They sat at the kitchen table while the building settled around them, and the city moved outside the window and the girls slept down the hall. She thought about how the last 2 years had looked. The elevator she'd cried in, the kitchen floor, the bus rides, the files scattered on the stairwell, the first time she'd heard 2 heartbeats on the ultrasound and thought, okay, 2, okay. She thought about how none of it was what she'd planned. "Owen," she said. He looked up from his tea. "Thank you." "For," she paused. "It was hard to be specific when you meant everything. For being normal about all of this." He was quiet for a moment. "You make it easy." She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it. In February, Brandon's lawyer sent a letter. He was seeking to modify the custody arrangement. Specifically, to formalize a schedule that would give him holidays and school breaks, which he had not taken advantage of in the year since the arrangement was set. Patricia read it and said, "He's getting pressure from somewhere. New wife, probably. Or a PR consultant." Josephine read it and felt the old tiredness settle into her shoulders. She had been here before. She knew this terrain. "What do I need to do?" she asked. Patricia told her. She did it. She was not afraid of him. She had learned, over the past 2 years, that fear of Brandon Merritt was only possible when you needed something from him, and she had stopped needing anything from him in the parking garage on Wellington Street, the day after she received Douglas's email. She had simply not known it yet. The hearing was in April. It was not dramatic. Family court rarely is, from the outside. The judge was thorough and patient and asked clear questions. Patricia presented what she needed to present. Brandon's lawyer presented the other side. Josephine sat at the table and answered what she was asked and said nothing she hadn't thought through. The arrangement was modified only slightly. Brandon was given formal school break provisions. He was also formally noted as having utilized less than 30% of his existing access in the previous year. The judge used the words "in the best interest of the children" twice, in tones that made Brandon's lawyer very still. Walking out of the building onto Queen Street afterward, Josephine stood in the cold April air and took a long breath. Patricia said, "That's done." "That's done," she agreed. She called Bev. Then she called her mother. Then she went to pick up Hazel and Pearl from the daycare on Somerset. And Pearl grabbed her by the collar when she lifted her, as Pearl always did, with the complete conviction of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. She and Owen had dinner together for the first time in March. Not in her kitchen, not with the girls, but at a small Italian place on Preston Street, a Tuesday evening when her mother was visiting and had shooed her out of her own apartment, with the focused authority of a woman who knew what she was doing. It was not called a date. They did not call it anything. He told her about growing up in Cape Breton. She told him about her first year at Carlton, the studio culture, the all-nighters. He asked about the projects she was most proud of, and she told him about Vanier, and about a residential renovation she'd done early in her career for a family, with a daughter who used a wheelchair, and how the drawings for that one still mattered to her more than anything else she'd built. He listened the way he always did, like what she was saying was worth hearing. Somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, she noticed that she was not tired. She was the person she recognized from before the last 3 years, the one who had opinions and stories, and the ability to be interested in the world outside her own immediate survival. She had missed her. He walked her back along the canal path afterward. November trees, streetlights on the water. She had her hands in her pockets, and he had his in his. And it was cold, and they were talking about something unimportant, and then they weren't talking, and they were standing in front of her building. "I'm glad we did this," she said. "Me too." He looked at her with the same direct, uncomplicated attention he always had. "Okay," she said. "Simple as that." By summer, things had shifted, not all at once. The way buildings settle, incrementally, invisibly, and then one day you look up and something has moved and it is more solid than it was before. She was not who she had been at the start of this. She knew that. She'd sat in a lawyer's office in November 2 years ago and signed her name to the end of something, and since then, she had built a custody agreement and a housing project, and a school renovation and a small, improbable village of people who showed up, and 2 daughters who grabbed her by the collar and demanded everything and gave her back something she couldn't name precisely, except that it felt like being necessary in the best possible way. Owen was there. Not dramatically, not in a way that rewrote what had come before. Just there in the way of someone who had been consistent long enough to become load-bearing. She knew that about structures, how something could look minimal and turn out to be essential. She had not asked for any of this to turn out the way it did. She had not planned Owen, or Bev's particular brand of love, or Margaret and her banana bread, or the way Pearl said "Mama" now with complete authority, or the morning the Vanier project was photographed for a national architecture publication, and the writer called her work quietly transformative. She had planned none of it. She had just every hard day shown up. And here, standing on a Saturday morning in June in her kitchen, with Owen making eggs and Pearl attempting to climb the chair, and Hazel very seriously feeding Cheerios to a stuffed rabbit, with the focused generosity of someone who had decided this was important work. Here was the thing she hadn't signed for. The thing that had come anyway. It was not what she'd lost. It was what she'd built.